Hello and welcome back, and everybody, Levi here, and in today's video I'm going to be going over a quite unique deck in my opinion that took inspiration from another deck that I put together in paper recently. I also made a video on it. I'll leave that in the cards or in the description somewhere for you to go watch if you want to. It's for Satoru the Infiltrator. I also found another commander that a similar strategy to that one also works with, and that commander is Extus Oriq Overlord. 1 white black for a 2/4 human warlock with double strike and magecraft. It says whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, return target non-legendary creature card from your graveyard to your hand. So in order to explain why I chose Extus, let's first go over the 0-drops and tell you exactly what I'm talking about when I say 0-drop. There are 10 total cards in this category that are available in these colors or in the game of Magic in general. Luckily, the 10th one just came out in Aether Drift, so I'll go over that one here. Market Back Walker, XX for a 0/0 artifact creature construct. The only line of text that matters on this card for us is this creature enters with X+1/+1 counters on it. So the way I'm using these is not paying any mana for them, paying 0 mana. They come in with 0 toughness and they immediately die to having 0 toughness. And there's many different ways we can get benefits off of doing this. So the first one is being cast triggers. Very cheap, obviously 0. You don't have to pay anything for these. You just cast them. You get cast triggers off that. ETB triggers. So when they enter, something else triggers, like whenever another creature enters, blah, blah, blah. You have dies triggers. Whenever another creature you control dies, something happens, or whenever a card leaves your graveyard trigger. So there's 4 main different triggers that you can actually build your deck around. And I kind of made a mix mosh of all the different strategies that you could use in this deck. So kind of use my deck as a template and pick a couple of themes that you would rather do in your deck, whether you want it to be more aristocrat focused, whether you want it to do like a leaves the graveyard type of effect, cast triggers like storm, you can do things like that. Keep in mind that you're also doing an instant or sorcery theme in addition to all this other stuff with your commander. So you want to make sure you have enough of those in the deck. So that's why I'd say, narrow your focus a little bit more than I have here. This is more of just an example of what you should be doing. So to give you an idea of what exactly I'm talking about when I say, payoffs and stuff like that, I have a few cards here that go over the different style of payoffs that you could throw in your deck. So the first one being Flame Shadow Conjuring, 3 and a red for an enchantment. Whenever a non-token creature ETBs under your control, you may pay red, and if you do, you create a token of that creature. It gains haste and you exile at the beginning of the next end step. We won't have to wait for the end step for that to happen because it's going to have 0 toughness when we cast one of our, Market Back Walker style effects, and it'll immediately die, and we can get either ETB triggers off of that or dice triggers. All of them really. The only ones you're not getting is basically like cast triggers or leaves a graveyard trigger. So you can kind of see where I'm going with, narrowing your focus. Next up, I got Gandalf White Rider, 3 and a white for a 3/3 avatar wizard with vigilance. It says whenever you cast a spell, creatures you control get +1/+0 until end of turn, and you scry 1. And then whenever Gandalf dies, you may put it in its owner's library 5th from the top. So this one's obviously going for the more storm aspect of the deck, casting a lot of instant or sorceries to get them back to your hand to cast them as many times as you can in a turn. That's where a payoff like Gandalf would really help us. Another great one here, Glaring Fleshraker, 2 and a colorless for a 2/2 Eldrazi drone. This is whenever you cast a colorless spell, create a 0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature token with sacrifice this creature to add colorless, so it's a little bit of ramp there. Also, when that Eldrazi spawn enters the battlefield, it'll trigger this second ability, which is whenever another colorless creature enters the battlefield under your control, this deals 1 damage to each opponent. So again, with the ETB strategy, getting ramp when you cast some of your 0-drops, because all of them are colorless spells, whether they be artifacts or otherwise, and also you're getting the payoff of pinging your opponents with the second ability. So just an overall amazing fit, and probably one of my favorite ones in this deck for the payoff category at least. God Eternal Oketra, 3 white for a 3/6 zombie god with double strike. It says whenever you cast a creature spell, create a 4/4 black zombie warrior creature token with vigilance, and then whenever Oketra dies or is put in exile from the battlefield, you may put it in its owner's library 3rd from the top. So again, if you're going that Gandalf White Rider / Oketra style of building it, trying to cast your 0-drops as many times as you can in a turn, getting some crazy payoffs like a bunch of 4/4s with vigilance can absolutely take over the game. Similar to that one, I have Murmuration, 4 and a white for an enchantment. Birds you control get +1/+1 have vigilance. Also says at the beginning of your end step, for each spell you've cast this turn, create a 1/2 bluebird creature token with flying named Stormcrow. Basically just a similar version to the Oketra. Instead of 4/4s, you are making 2/3s with vigilance as long as the Murmuration sticks around, but they do have flying, so that's really nice. You can definitely go more of like a token route with these style of cards. And if you are doing a bunch of tokens and you want to be attacking a lot, Onslaught is a great payoff for the same strategy. Single red mana for an enchantment. Whenever you successfully cast a creature spell, you can tap target creature. So if you can cast one of your 0-drops 5 times in a turn, you can basically tap down one of your opponent's entire boards, swinging for a bunch of damage. It's one way to close out a game for sure. Another extremely important category to go over here, the recursion. Several different ways we can get cards either back to our hand or back on the battlefield. One really good way to get like a fell sweep of all of the 0-drops, if you happen to have a lot in your graveyard, Ascend from Avernus, X white for a sorcery. Return all creature and planeswalker cards with mana value X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, and then you exile Ascend Sun from Avernus. So one way to use it, if you don't want to pay anything for the X, you could just do 3 mana, get all your 0 drops back. If you happen to have a couple other creatures in your graveyard, you can just add a couple extra mana onto this, also get those creatures back. Just an insanely valuable card in the deck. Kind of similar to that one, Faith's Reward, 3 and a white for an instant. Return to the battlefield all permanent cards in your graveyard that were put there from the battlefield this turn. Great against board wipes. So this is good board wipe protection, as well as doing our main strategy, which is just getting all of our 0 drops back onto the field so we can get more triggers of whatever payoffs we actually happen to have out. This next one's really cool. Liza, Forgotten Archangel, 2 white, black for a 4/5 angel with flying and lifelink. Whenever another non-token creature you control dies, return that card to its owner's hand at the beginning of the next end step, and if a creature an opponent controls would die, exile instead. So the exile part's also really good, but just being able to cast 2 or 3 or 4 of your 0 drops, get them all back on your end step, and then play them out the next turn, just crazy value. Speaking of disgusting value, Luminous Broodmoth, 2 white for a 3/4 insect with flying. Whenever a creature you control without flying dies, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control with a flying counter on it. So if you've ever seen the Luminous Broodmoth in a game, you know how insane it can get. I have this in my Flage deck, and it is just so much fun to be able to get cards in and out of your graveyard multiple times a turn with your Luminous Broodmoth. So this card's insanely useful in a deck like this. And possibly, maybe not, the most important card in the deck, Oriq Loremage, 2 black for a 3/3 human warlock. It says tap, search your library for a card and put it in your graveyard. If it's an instant or sorcery, you put a counter on Oriq Loremage. Don't really care about that last part, but being able to tap this every turn, going to get one of your 0 drops, putting them in your graveyard. I also have this one in my Satoru deck, and whenever you get it, you can just fill your graveyard every turn with all your 0 drops. Being able to resurrect them, bring them back to your hand, just getting crazy value off of this guy is just insane. Whenever you have your Oriq Loremage out, you are sitting pretty, that's for sure. Then we have a different kind of recursion. This one's to get our instant and sorcery cards back so that we can trigger our commander a little more often. Return the past, 4 red for an enchantment. As long as it's your turn, each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard has flashback, and its flashback cost is equal to its mana cost. So essentially with this out, this doubles the amount of instant or sorceries we are allowed to play in our deck. I don't have too many instant or sorceries in this list. Like I said, this is more of a guideline as opposed to a final list, so I would probably add more instant and sorceries into the deck and take out some of the payoffs. That way you can be triggering your commander a little more often. But the cool thing about this deck specifically is it doesn't really rely on its commander's ability. You can definitely do the thing without your commander, but just having it adds a little nice level of assurance that we can at least have some way to get those creatures back, even if we don't draw our other recursion spells. This one's probably tied for most important card in our deck, because I think it's the most important card in my Satoru deck. It's Shirei, Shizo's Caretaker, 4 and a black for a 2/2 spirit. Whenever a creature with power 1 or less is put into your graveyard from the battlefield, you may return that card to the battlefield at the beginning of the next end step if Shirei is still on the battlefield. I didn't know how insanely busted this card was until I actually played with it. So let's just go over a modest scenario here, right? You only have Shirei and you have Market Back Walker in your hand. How this works, you cast the Market Back Walker, it'll die, come back on your end step, then it'll immediately die again. Since it already is your end step, when it dies, the trigger for Shirei is going to go on the stack and it's going to come back on your opponent's end step as well. Then when it comes back, it dies again. Then on the next opponent's end step, it happens again and again. Obviously, if you have 4 players, this triggers 4 times a turn rotation, and the value only gets crazier if you have more than one of your 0 drops. If you have like 4 or 5, that's 4 or 5 ETBs and death triggers and leaves to graveyard triggers every single turn rotation. This card is actually insane. Definitely the most important card in your deck. I actually think this is better than Oriq Loremage. Protect this at all costs. I have not a lot of protection in the deck, but use it on this guy if your opponents want to target it, because it's so freaking good. Similar to the Return the Past, I have Toshiro Umezawa, 1 black for a 2/2 human samurai. I won't go into Bushido, but it says whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, you may cast target instant card from your graveyard. If that spell would be put into a graveyard this turn, exile it instead. Again, this is just giving us double usage out of our instant and sorceries, making it a little bit easier to get cards out of your graveyard with your commander. I also threw in Viconia Drow Apostate, 2 and a black for a 2/3 elf cleric. It says at the beginning of your upkeep, if there are 4 or more creature cards in your graveyard, return one of them at random to your hand. So more than likely, those 4 cards are probably going to be our 0 drops. Whichever one we get, it doesn't really matter. This just gives us back 1 on every one of our upkeeps. Not too many, but I have a couple interesting ramp cards here. Seance Board up first, 2 mana artifact with Morbid. At the beginning of each end step, if a creature died this turn, put a soul counter on Seance Board. You can tap it and add X mana of any one color, where X is the number of soul counters on Seance Board. Spend it only to cast instant, sorcery, demon, or spirit spells. I will note that Shirei is also a spirit, but the main reason we have this in the deck is to be able to cast our instant sorceries. Also, it's pretty much guaranteed that the Morbid will be triggering each of our end steps. Another great ramp piece, Pitiless Plunderer, 3 and a black for a 1/4 human pirate. Whenever another creature you control dies, you make a treasure token. So especially good in this deck because when our creatures are dying, we're not paying any mana to cast them. So we're actually netting getting mana from our creatures dying. That one's fantastic. You also probably want to throw in some instant / sorcery ramp effects just to fill out your deck with as many as you really can without, taking up too many other slots. So I threw in cards like Mana Geyser, 3 red for a sorcery, add red for each tapped land your opponents control. Little unfortunate it only adds red because red I think is definitely our least played color in the deck, but it does pay for the colorless, so it's not really that big of a deal. And the last category I'm going over here is just some of the card draw. Like I said, we want to have instant sorceries in addition to our permanents, so Sign in Blood style effects, black sorcery, target player draws 2, loses 2. There's plenty of not as efficiently costed effects that do this, so you can go through and just look through all the different instant sorceries that draw you cards. Then we have some of the payoff ones like Midnight Reaper, 2 and a black for a 3/2 zombie knight. Whenever a non-token creature you control dies, this creature deals 1 damage to you and you draw a card. And then the other payoff one being Welcoming Vampire, 2 and a white for a 2/3 vampire flying. Whenever one or more other creatures power 2 or less enter the battlefield area you control, draw a card, only once per turn though. So obviously the Midnight Reaper being a little bit better. However, it does take some of our life total with it, but the trade-off is definitely worth it. So that's basically like a general overview of my Extus Oriq Overlord 0-drop deck. Not to beat a dead horse, but you pretty much get the idea of what's going on here. You can play like a giant smorgasbord of whatever cards you want to, like I did. If you want to just use my deck list, you can. I'm not sure how effective it will be, considering we don't have too many instant sorceries. I'm sure you can kind of work around with the numbers and make it really work. Or you can go like straight full ETB, full dice triggers, do like a more aristocrat style deck. I didn't really want to focus too much on that. You could do the whole blood artist style thing where you're pinging people when things die. I feel like that's a little overdone. I have a lot of decks that do similar things, like my Satoru deck already does that, so I didn't feel like I should do that in this deck, but you definitely could. You can do a whole like aristocrat style deck with your creatures dying because the 0-drops die all the time. You can do a whole leaves your graveyard thing. There's a lot of cards that say whenever a creature or whenever a card leave your graveyard, you get this thing. Like Tormod. Tormod gives you 2/2 zombies. There's tons of things like that you can build around. You can do the cast trigger. You can make a Mardu Storm deck and just try to get Market Back Walker, those style of cards back to your hand. Cast them out as many times as you can. Get that storm count really high. Playing like a creature storm deck, very strange, especially in Mardu. But I just really like this commander. I like this strategy. This isn't the first time I've tried to build around Extus, not even the backside. The backside I think is more popular than the front side. People really like that backside. I have a friend who plays the backside and it's an interesting and strong deck. But like there's one I thought you can do a cycling deck with this. There's tons of different ways you can build Extus. I really like this version. However, if you want to check out the full deck list, I have it down in the description. Go ahead and click the Architect link. While you're down there, I also have a link to my Patreon. If you feel like supporting the channel, I have a little intro video over there going over the perks you get for subscribing. Also, if you want to buy any of these cards on TCG Player, I have an affiliate link down in the description. Go ahead and give that a click. I get a little bit of money back when you guys buy using that link. That's really all I have for today. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. All right, take care.